السلام عليكم شباب، رجعنا وياكم وحلقة جديدة من برنامج.
Welcome back for another episode of Real Fake Guns. Today we're going to take a look on the GHK AKM and its compatibility with real parts, both the drop-in fit parts but also the ones that need some modifications to fit. And as you can see, the majority of this build is based out of the real gun, the Romanian MD90. The Romanian AK is one of the most common guns used in conflicts worldwide, such as in the Iraq War and in the Balkan War. Alright, so let's take a closer look on the build itself. We should start with the drop-in fit parts and then move on to the parts that need modifications or where we have to mod the GHK to fit. So let's start in the front, the muzzle brake. No rocket science here, just screw it on. Also the cleaning rod, it fits in there nicely. And the stock, this is a Romanian MD90 stock. There's also a wooden stock for the MD63 configuration. While I haven't had the problem myself, I have heard of people having issues with this part being too wide, like on the East German for example. If you have that issue, you can just file down this side and it should work. Same goes for the bottom if you have any issues. All you do on both on these are that you remove these two screws and just pull the stock off and slap on the one you want. And this works for any kind of AKM stock. It does not work for the underfolder stock that goes in here, only the one with fixed stock with this tang here. These are for the fixed variants and fits there nicely. Some of them are pretty tight, so you can use a plastic hammer to hammer it on, but other than that it's pretty straightforward. And what I like about this stock is that it's very easy to fold. Just push the button like that and push the button again and the fold gets extended. Very handy to use. And if we move on to the handguards, these are also drop-in fit. The upper handguard, the lower handguard, and even the gas tube. So, in order to show this, we need to field strip it and remove the bolt carrier as it blocks the upper handguard and gas tube. And now we can remove the upper handguard. Here we have another variant. This is called a cheese grater type. As you can see here, no problem at all. This is actually an original from the 80s and 90s, US made. And these are Romanian gas tube that they welded on the barrel shroud. This one is very hard to get now, it's a collectible, so I'm very happy to have it since they aren't manufactured anymore. But they are reproductions of it. Khyber Pass Customs makes one that you can just slide on any gas tube. And also LCT makes a replica of it that you can get. Most of times these are drop-in fit, but sometimes you need to trim down this part in order to fit. It's very easy, just take a file and remove the material. And that is because when you lower this lever, it has to fit. If you can't close it, it means you have to remove material here. And let's move on to the lower handguard. Here we have different types of handguards. The more classic type, and here we have, it's the same as the Dong one, but it's been cut down. These are very commonly seen in the Balkan War in the 90s. And often with stickers. Here's a Terminator 2 one that I got from Aux. I think these are Yugoslavian made or sold stickers, as I'm a huge Terminator fan. It was nice to slap on John Connor there and on my wooden stock. I also got the sticker from him. And these, here we have Arnold Schwarzenegger to get that vibe. And here we have some notches for someone counting something. Well, back to the handguards. For example, if I want to add this instead, just put it on like this and close it. Very easy, drop-in fit. What can happen sometimes, but rarely, is that you need to trim down the sides here or like here. But most of the times you just need to push it really hard or hammer it down with a plastic club so you get a very tight and solid fit. Here we have a Hungarian AMD 65 lower handguard. It should also have a pistol grip, but I thought I'd show this because many people think it will not fit regular AKMs, but it actually does. It has its tabs here, like on the wooden one. They aren't solid like the wooden one, but it still fits, and the purpose of these are the same as that one. So let's just show how that look. Need to squeeze it a little. Super tight fit, but it does fit. And there you have it. Rock solid. And if you add a sheath greater upper handguard, you get a very cyberpunk look to it. It looks super retro but yet futuristic. That's a cool setup that I will probably use at post-apocalyptic LARPs in the future. And let's move on to the pistol grip. These are drop-in fit, no issue here. And we can take a closer look on the inside. I even have a real screw, but you can use the GHK. I did for many years, so it's no problem at all. Here on the inside we have, I think this is called T-screws. These are almost drop-in fit. You need to trim down the sides here and trim down the sides here in order to fit. But you can use the GHK, it's also no problem. And while we're at it, let's move on to the parts that need slightly more modification. This is our original trigger guard. I used a Yugoslavian before and it was mostly drop-in fit. But what I needed to do is to drill out these holes in the same pattern as the threads are beneath it in order to have it to fit. Other than that, the magazine locked onto the magazine catch very nicely and tight and fed the magazine well. But that's on my M70 now, but now I have a Type 56 Chinese trigger guard. This was slightly different. The tab here was further down, so I had a little bit of wiggle play room on the magazine. So what I did was I trimmed down this little part here on the receiver in order to get the trigger guard to come closer to the body. And after I did that, I grinded down this part a few millimeters. The magazine fits very nicely. And now I have a very tight fit. As you can see, it sits very nicely in place. But just take a little bit each time and remember, measure it out of the parts you have. So I can't say the exact measurements because you have to check the part you have in your hand. If you make it too tight, you can always trim down this one slightly and test your way there. So let's move on to the dust cover. The dust And now we're going to take a look on the real dust cover. The real dust cover is shorter than the GHK receiver. In fact, most airsoft receivers are too long. The only ones that aren't too long is Real Sword and the Celsius PTV AK. So what you need to do is cut a new notch like this original one in front of the old one here, so it will fit. Some people have been bothered about the 2mm gap it leaves, sure, but I think it justifies having 25 centimeters of a real dust cover. It's a choice up to you, but I think this looks so much better. And also because, as you can see here, the remaining one does not have wings that goes over the fire selector like the Russian variants. And the GHK comes as standard as a Russian replica. It has the wings, but as you can see here, the Romanian one does not. And that's another feature that adds to realism. And as you can see here, when we close the real fire selector, it lines up so nice and flush. I'm very happy with that. And also what you need to do is to trim the backside of this. Here you can see I have removed some material and also blued it. The length that worked for me is 10.5 millimeters. Also a recent discovery I did was that if you expand these little narrow angles here, make them wider, it will be easier to get the real dust cover on. As you can see here, they match the shape a lot better. So this will make it a lot easier to add a real dust cover. Putting on the dust cover after you do this is somewhat different than what you're used to. It can be tricky, so don't take too much material of this. So what you do is you take this part into the dust cover before you put the dust cover on, and you put front in first, and then you start to lower the back and push the button slowly and careful until you can feel that it grabs on, and you can press the dust cover down. Then you start to release the button, and you can feel that it's in place. It won't go anywhere. And speaking of fire selector, here we have the real one, and you saw how easy I could remove that. As you do with the real AKs, you can't do that on the GHK ones. Taking it off that easy. And what you need to do to fit this on your GHK, you have to remove some material here in order to have the bolt carrier to move over it, as you can see here. It's not much, only a few millimeters. And also on the bottom side, you have to weld and add material so that it can connect with the full auto sear, because without it, it will only shoot semi-auto. Back in 2016 I did a RPK build with genuine Molot parts and with the same amount of real parts to it as in this video. But what I noticed was the fire selector for the RPK was slightly different than on the Romanian, as I did not have to weld it. And here's an old video of me explaining it, and I have to apologize for the poor audio. Also, to make the fire selector work, I noticed later that you have to remove material from here. Not much, but only like 1 millimeter or something, because the fire control group gets stuck and jammed sometimes on semi-auto. Also, here you have to remove some material. And for this I used a small cutting disc. And that is because the receiver thickness around this area is thicker on the GHK, and only take a few millimeters each time, and that is so that you can hand fit it. You will remove and press it down, and you want a very nice and tight fit to it. As you can see here, it requires some force, and you get a nice snappy function to it. That's real nice. It won't jump down when you shoot and such. That sometimes is an issue with these. Alright, so let's move on to the barrel. This is also a very common question I get, the Samoon steel barrel. My dad helped me with it and put it in a lathe to change the diameter so that the real gas block and real front sights fits, for example. On a Romanian type, and I guess a Russian type as well, you need to change the diameter in order to have the front sight and gas block to fit. You could also drill these up, but I prefer to have a correct dimension. I have also added bluing liquid to this afterwards and then worn it down so it looks used. But this is not always a necessary case to do, as with on the Yugoslavian Zastava, for example. It has a much heavier barrel, So this is bigger and this is bigger. So sometimes you even have to add material, like on the rear sight block and such. And the same goes for the Chinese Type 56, for example. The barrel is slightly thicker, so the diameter of the front sight and gas block and so on is different than on a Romanian and Russian, for example. So what you need to do is to measure the parts that you have before you put it in the lathe and change the diameter of the outer barrel. In order to have the lower handguard retainer, you don't have to change the diameter, at least not for the Romanian type. It can be modded. All I had to do to this one, and you don't have to have a steel barrel for this, it works with the standard GHK one as well, but all I had to do is to remove some materials here and here, so both sides, so that the handguard retainer can slide on. But this is also different depending on what gun model you're going to make. I also had to remove some material here in order to have the lever to close nice and tightly. Here we have the rear sight block base.
It was almost a drop-in fit part, but all we had to do was to sand it a little bit and then hammer it down with a plastic club, and it sat there rock solid.
Although the drilled hole it has does not align up with the steel barrel, but still it's such a tight fit, it won't move. It sits super strong, and also the gas block will secure it so it can't physically move forward, and it can't move backward since it's all maxed out to the end.
Some have had the issue with the bolt carrier getting stuck inside of the roof on the rear sight. I haven't had the issue on the Romanian, but I did have that issue on my RPK rear sight. What you do is just take a grinding head on a Dremel, stick it in there and remove as much material as you need until it cycles properly.
Also here on the front, on the GHK front sight, it has the threads, but on a real gun, the threads is on the barrel, and now when I have a real front sight, we had to cut off the threads and weld it to the steel barrel, and I let my grandfather help me out with that. So I'm very thankful for having my grandfather helping me with this. It also adds a nice memory of him and me doing things together, as he is 93 years old now. Another thing I highly recommend to add is the Hephaestus steel bolt carrier. I have the complete set with bolt carrier, enhanced recoil and enhanced spring, and also the fire control group with steel parts. That is because of three reasons. One is the lifespan of the gun will extend as it's steel against steel instead of steel against magnesium parts as before. That will wear down quickly. And second is recoil. It will add recoil, and if we take a closer look here, it's a steel bolt carrier, but it's still very snappy and light. It's not sluggish as the WNS that is full travel. This is standard travel, and also super clever design. They have removed material here and here, which make it very snappy and nice to use. And also the last part, as it's steel, I have removed all the surface finish and re-blued it with bluing liquid so that it matches the real parts very nicely. As we can see here, it looks so much more realistic. And this is a feature I've been waiting a very long time for, so I'm very happy that they just released this. So I highly recommend checking that out, as it also gives a nice balance to the gun. I've always felt the GHK are too light, but when you add it, it feels so much better and very realistic. Another thing I have got many questions about is the real magazine conversion. I did this back in 2016 for my RPK build that I did, but I never released the guide as I never finished it. But Badabing did a super nice magazine guide, so I didn't think I would bother, but I still have got questions about it, so I thought I should disassemble it quickly and explain it, but I highly recommend to watch Badabing's conversion, as it's a very good video. Here we have it. I use a 40 round magazine, Hungarian magazine, as I think it looks very badass in the gun. And what's nice about when you have a 40 rounder is that you can also have the original magazine spring. That will keep the end plate in place and won't rattle around, as you can see here. Because on the 30 rounders you can't keep the spring as it's such a tight fit, but on the bigger ones you can. You can also access the CO2 cartridge there very easily. So what I did to fit it to this steel magazine is I also trimmed down the outside of the internals in order to have it to fit. And on the back side here I just cut in the same pattern as GHK, and same here on the front. So let's take it apart and watch how it looks on the inside. If we take a look on the pin, I only used one pin that I drilled to keep it in place. That is enough. And I didn't drill that side. You may think that's odd, but this is enough to hold it together. But now you might wonder, how do you get it out? Well, you only need to punch that in so it goes into that wall, and that is enough space to pull it out. A super tight fit. As you can see here, I trimmed down both sides. It took some time, but I used a large cutting disc and just grinded it down so that it could fit the inside of the real magazine. Also removed some here and here. It's pretty self-explanatory. You remove material and try to fit it until it works. Also on the inside here, I had to remove some. That is for the BBs, so they won't be blocked. But other than that, as I said, I really recommend to check out Badabing's guide, as it explains it all very well. Another of the most common questions I get with this build is where I sourced all the real parts. Since this is a very old build of mine, I did things different back then. I bought each part separate at theakforum.com and had it shipped over. It's slightly more expensive, but what I do recommend and what I do mostly now is that I buy parts kits where it's already a gun that is missing receiver, bolt and barrel mostly. And those kits are perfect for these kinds of special builds. Sometimes, depending where you live, you can buy a deactivated one maybe and convert it and use even more real parts.
Many of you ask where I source parts. One of the places I use is Cold War Collectibles, based in UK, England. They can help you with both big and small parts for your collection.
Seeing as I live in Sweden, the local laws here are we can't have real barrel, we can't have real receiver. And to talk about this closely, because some of you have probably seen my real M16 converted to airsoft, we can have real lower full auto receivers legally. We can't put them on real guns though, so I put it on my airsoft. We can't have uppers. But on an AK, this is the receiver. It does not split like on the M16 that has two receiver parts. This is not a receiver, it's a dust cover. This is the only receiver. And we can't have it, sadly. But these three parts, I'm not that super bothered about it. I get to do less work, so it suits me. But I would be very curious to see this in other parts in the world. Maybe you can get the real receiver working and such. I know I would be very curious to see it. So if you do it, please contact me in the future and show it. I'm very happy with this build, even though it's so old in my collection. But I think it looks beautiful. It's so fun to play with. It's loud, heavy recoil. It feels so realistic. That's all for this time. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe and to check out the Facebook and Instagram account. And if you are feeling generous, check out the Patreon account so we can continue to develop this channel. All named Real Fake Guns, and you can find the links in the description below.